Okay, so this video is on the Ashley Norton lock set installation and function. The particular lock set that I'm dealing with in this little video, hopefully it's not going to run very long, is what they call the privacy lock. The way you tell the privacy lock from the passage lock, the privacy lock panel, outer decorative panels here are going to have a hole, and that hole is going to be on both of them. Okay, so the hole is on both of them, and you use these more or less interchangeably, but the way they go on a door, because it's a lever lock, not a knob lock, and it's all bronze on this particular one, is that they mount this way. Okay, there is a way you can turn around the little clamps and springs and mount them kind of like this, with the long side down. We're doing long side up on this. They were ordered this way, so that's the way they're going to go in. The other thing is, with the detail on these doors, there's some metal stuff that would block it from being the other way. There's some other videos in the series which deal with cutting the lock, opening on that. That video goes very slowly because these look like oak, they cut like oak, but they're actually a foreign hardwood that is a little tricky to deal with, but it's basically very similar to oak. And it's in a kind of a luxury installation. It's usually where we're going to see these types of locks, but very careful to understand this is an interior installation. This is not an exterior lock set, even though it's large, heavy, relatively expensive compared to your common Home Depot stuff. This is an interior installation. What you want to do is open it up, take an inventory on the contents. If you're dealing around, let's say, other woodwork, fine wood floor, you have tools, be very careful about how and where you're setting your tools down. Here, I've set a couple on the floor, but I've been very careful about it. If you are finished cutting the lock open the way I am, anything that has a sharp edge needs to be out of the way. Okay, drill bits, a drill can be knocked over and gouge the floor, but we're going to be using this at one stage. At another stage in this, we're going to be having to drill some small holes and put screws in here. The screws that are included with this kit are slotted screws. They are not Phillips. I will say again, they're slotted, not Phillips, not a cross type screw, not a number 2 pH. The screws which hold this stuff in are number 2 pH. The screws that would normally hold the door jamb side in are number 2 pH, but this is getting a custom installation on that we're going to go into. As far as the lock itself function goes, a relatively common US style lock cylinder, but what you'll see here is that on the internal, and this comes separately, it's basically like this. You'll see the notches here. It can turn all the way around prior to installation so that you can install the same lock set, whether it's the right side or left side opening door. You'll see a small tab mechanism here. This has to do with the way it activates the levers, and you'll see more of that later. But the important part to take note of right now is you see how one of these has a threaded hole, the other does not. The side with the threaded hole is the side that goes on the inside of the room where you would expect the person to be able to lock themselves in or lock other people out. This is not a high security installation. It's a privacy installation. You want to pre-drill these if you're using hardwood, because the screws that are included with this are bronze also, which personally I think is not good. The bronze screws are weaker than steel screws. Impact drivers will break those. I'm using a Ryobi 18 volt impact driver. Optimally, you probably want to be using something that's 12 volt or below. Do not use a DeWalt 18 or 20 volt. It'll be too strong. It'll break stuff. The other thing is you get this this little bar control that goes through here. It comes with an O-ring on it. You take the O-ring off, don't lose it. You'll see a notch cut here. That's where the O-ring will eventually go. You'll see that this spins. That's part of how the locking mechanism works on this. You'll also see kind of a star-shaped thing here. Even though it's possible to mount this sideways, we want the squareness of it to mount so that it's square up, down, side to side. Now, the other thing we want to happen when we pass that through, that passed through wrong. No, it passed through correctly. What we're going to want is that ring, when it passes through, that ring has to show all the way. See how that ring shows all the way? Now what's going to keep that from falling back out when I go to install the two sides of the lock is that we put the little O-ring on here, which I can't do one-handed. I'm going to do that while the camera's off. Okay, so I wrestle that O-ring on. You'll notice some flexibility with the lock set in there. That's going to firm up when we get the two sides installed. Next, your option on whether you want to install the inside or the outside. We're going to install the inside here. You'll see that this isn't star-shaped, it's square. So we simply line that up. You're going to double check that this hole, see that hole right there, the hole in the lock set, lines up with the threaded hole here on the inside of the room. So with the piece just set up here, I basically would hold it with my thumb, relatively even and level with the other details on the door. And this is something where you kind of eyeball it. If there's any irregularity, you eyeball it to where it looks best. The screws, hopefully we're getting enough light to show this, the screws are black and bronze. Okay, so you got to be careful about scratching them. If they do scratch, they're going to re-blacken on their own, kind of. But what's normal with this type of lock is that as things wear, it wears to that kind of copper bronze look. And there is a way you can accelerate that by hitting it with steel wool after everything's installed. But what we're doing here is I've got to have a pre-drilled hole because this is a wood screw, common wood screw. Don't use a power tool on this at all. Use a hand screwdriver. Now, when I pre-drill these holes, what happens is they can end up a little bit off center of each other, and that's fine because depending on the alignment of a particular hole, what we're going to do is we're going to see which one kind of pushes one way or the other way compared to the other hole. And then that's the one which gets tightened first, okay? And the reason we do that is if this thing is a little off level, we tighten one hole or the other hole in order to tighten it, in order to get it to line up. If for some reason neither one really does that, we leave those both loose. We drill the bottom holes at a point where it will bring things over. Because the installation on this uses a large hole here to clear the lock assembly, but it really doesn't matter if you're a little bit one way or the other way. When everything's said and done, it doesn't really matter if you're one way or the other way as long as the edge of the lock covers the hole. And that allows you a little bit of fudge factor in adjusting its position as you tighten down these screws. Hopefully I've gotten the angle right on that. The way this went was I tightened this screw at first, it kicked over to an angle a little bit. I loosened this one up, I tightened this one down, everything came in straight. And I can still kind of hand shove it a little bit. Then I'll drill these two holes and get these screws in. The thing to look out for in this sort of high-end installation is you want to have the vacuum handy at all times to pull up the wood chips immediately because you don't want anyone walking on those wood chips and then grinding them into the freshly done wood floor or other details. That went. Again, the vacuum cleaner's got to be immediately handy. I'm using it to pull the sawdust and wood chips out of the lock assembly and out of anything that I'm working on. And then I preset these screws, kind of hard to see with it all being black. And I'm very slowly turn these, again, not using a power tool. And if my hand isn't on the camera, my fingers are going to be right up here stabilizing this. So, one hand driving the back of the screwdriver, the other one stabilizing this so it doesn't skip or pry off. And again, we want to drill that hole large enough that you're not stressing that screw to go in, because these screws are bronze and they could break, and you don't want to bugger these up either. Okay, so a little camera changeroo, and a memory issue on the other one. But for the function of these locks, basically you press the button in from the inside and then it's deactivated by hitting the lock, or it's deactivated when you close the door. It goes like that. So you cannot, let's say, lock the door on your way out. It's not going to work that way. If for some reason somebody on the outside needs to get in, let's say somebody inside's had a heart attack, a medical issue, something's happening on the other side of the door, the only two ways to deal with that are going to be to use a common screwdriver to get this apart, and if those are replaced with security screws, then that's not going to happen. And the other way is to use a punch or an owl, or some kind of rod or something to press into that hole to deactivate the other side of that little lever mechanism. And if that gets blocked off, that's not going to happen. Some of the locks are still shipped with a little screw that goes there and blocks that off. But building codes, at least in the United States, are that there has to be some way to get in from the outside in case of an emergency, using some commonly available item. If you need to lock this at another time, your options include drilling a door to install a deadbolt somewhere in here, which is entirely possible, or doing it further up, or other types of locking mechanisms, which I think we're going to be doing here. But what you're not going to be able to do, again, I have to reiterate, even though it's a large heavy-duty lock, you're not turning this into an apartment lock or an exterior lock, because there's no key mechanism here. It's just basically a large heavy-duty interior door lock.